Jason, here we are. It's in the books, the Barrett Media Top 20 across the formats for shows and program directors. I know it was a absolute huge lift for you. Reflect on it now that it's done.
Uh, the first reaction, Jeff, is thank God it's over. In all seriousness, I'm really glad we did it. I'm very proud of what we put out. You know me well enough. You've worked with me now for what, 8 months? And so, the perfectionist in me is always going to look at the small things, right? We had this image with one letter off, or hey, you know what? We put this out and we should have had it out sooner. Those kind of things. Like when we started the series, our newsletter didn't go out inside of the first 5 minutes that I wanted it out. So those are the things behind the scenes that nobody else will care about other than me. That being said, I thought it was important to do this for music radio. We've done it for sports for a decade. We've done it for news for about 3 or 4 years, and it's had massive success across those formats. Music radio, I think sometimes people forget how big our business is, and it's easy to lose sight and appreciation for what radio does because you just hear the negatives. You hear layoffs here, layoffs there, this person lost a job, right? And you hear it on the advertising front. Oh, the radio business is not as fruitful as it once was. And I sit there and I go, so we're complaining about a business that still produces $14 billion, that has 14,000 radio stations with a lot of people in them. And so it's a powerful industry. And the reason I wanted to do it, when you start to see the faces and the brands that are doing special work and are recognized by their peers, it reminds you, hey, there's a lot of really talented, great people. And by the way, those are just the ones that made the list. That doesn't mean somebody who's in 22nd place is not great too. Because as we talk about this, you'll find out like, hey, there's some shows you might be 22nd, but you're on a list of 210 shows. Pretty impressive. So I'm very proud of it. I really appreciate the support that we got across the industry from the DJs, the program directors, the executives, the market managers. I really want to thank Radio.Cloud for stepping up and supporting us with the series. They did an awesome job getting on board with this. And overall, very happy with the first year rollout. But the competitor in me looks at it and says, we could get better next year.
Well, one thing just to touch on briefly is, you've done these with news talk and with sports radio, and those are nice. They're in their own bucket. But when you come to music radio, you've got a lot of buckets to fill. So that was a big lift.
Well, on that note, and this was really important. So as I know the one challenge when you do these, you can list all the details, but not everybody reads. And they like to go ahead to their image, see it, and tell the world, that they were on the list. But I put in there, we had 173 people vote in this process, which was awesome. I honestly was blown away by that because I reach out to about 250 plus. Now that I've had more time, I think next year I'll probably reach out to 350 and I'll try to get the list up to, 200, 225. But that being said, it's not just about involving 173 people, Jeff. You have to have 30 to 40 people that really know the urban format, 30, 40 people that really know the country format. The one benefit is we have some people that vote that are executives that oversee a lot of formats. You have some PDs in stations that are running an AC, a CHR in a country. So great. There's some spillover there. But what I didn't want is you just get like when we do sports, I have 50, 60 sports executives, programmers, all the people involved in the know that are part of it. Same thing on News Talk. What I didn't want was a classic rock PD who doesn't pay attention to urban voting on urban and an urban PD who doesn't pay attention to classic rock voting on classic rock. So that makes it harder because you got to talk to a lot more people about specific lanes, which back to why I'm glad it's over because it was an exhausting process, but one that I feel pretty good about.
You and I had a lot of fun during the run of it, bouncing back and forth, looking at social media, sending each other links. I'd almost use the word giddy if two guys like us can be giddy, but it was almost there. But it also made its way into other things. Did you see Fred Jacobs, Jacobs Media column that?
I did. I read it. I thought Fred wrote a good piece. I'll bust Fred's chops, though, that headline's deceiving.
Yes, yes, it was.
Wait a second. I love Lorne Michaels. I love Saturday Night Live. This is an awesome piece, but Lorne Michaels is not a music radio programmer. What does it have to do with a music radio top 20? But that being said, look, Fred's been supportive of us for a decade. I think he's brilliant, one of the smartest people in the business. And so the fact that he was paying attention to it gave us a little lift on it. I'll take that every day.
So before we dig into the categories here and look at some specifics, it's probably important just to explain the process, how it was done, what made it difficult. You touched on it a little bit, but let's drop into that a little bit here before we go to the categories.
So I'm glad you asked that because the way I do this, I want to make sure that a lot of different radio companies are part of the voting process. The reason for that, if I just go to 50 iHeart PDs, you're going to have a very heavily slanted iHeart series. If I did Odyssey, it'd be the same thing, right? So if you go into the articles, you're going to see we had 27 companies involved and 18 format groups, format consultants, right, who were part of that. Because I want depth. Everybody's got different tastes, knows different things, comes from different pockets of the country. And so having that balance, I'm not going to tell you we have it perfect. I'll always, even in sports, we've done it a decade. I could find things that we could be stronger in that all the time. So that being said, I think it's really important when we created the top 20 for sports and have expanded it since, I've always felt I could go out tomorrow, save myself a lot of time, and just do a top 20 week. Get 5 people on staff and we pick our own top 20. Could do that tomorrow. I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be, this is how the industry sees itself. I want the people in the know in these companies who know so-and-so in market X is a good program director. Market Y, this guy gets a lot of credit, but maybe he's not as strong as this other person, right? So I think it's important to at least let the industry weigh in on the process, which is how we've built this. The other part of this, because when you're getting all these people voting, you have to have some kind of system that's going to work. Otherwise, hey, like you've probably seen these and every group, every platform has them. When I was a programmer, I saw them all the time. Hey, send in your nominations of who you think is the best programmer in this business, right? And if 8 people send in nominations, but no one else supported someone else, that person's number 1 on the list. I don't want to do that. So what I came up with was, okay, we're going to ask you to vote on 10. The reason music has a lot more people involved. And if you pick somebody number 1, that's 20 points. If it's number 2, it's 18. It goes down by 2 each time. And ultimately what I do when you're taking 27 companies and you get all these format consultants involved, you put it all together and where it lands, it lands. As I say in the piece, Jeff, I don't vote. I'm not here to pretend that I'm a music radio programmer. I'm not in this to chase music radio consulting deals. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm here to present what the industry gives me. So if people have an issue with something on it, I go, look, this is how your peers in decision-making positions see it. So maybe you have great ratings in a market, but maybe you're not telling that story publicly enough, right? Or maybe you're doing a great job telling a story, and getting yourself out there, but maybe you're in 10th place in the market and you're up against a lot of people who are in the top 5. So, that's how this works. And so we try to give them a couple of criteria. I'll ask them for, essentially the ear test. What do you think sounds good? Originality, who's connecting across multiple platforms. Ratings are obviously important, industry buzz. And then when you get into some of the national shows, it's one thing to say you're syndicated, but are you syndicated like Bobby Bones and Charlemagne the God, or are you syndicated with 10 stations? Because there are a lot of shows that have regional reach, but that's not the same. So that being said, that doesn't mean you can't be high ranked on the list either with that. If you have a great show that sounds good, does good ratings, and creates a lot of buzz. So I know that's a long answer, but I wanted to be very thorough on that because I know a lot of people probably have been exposed to us for the first time in this process or trying to learn how it all works. And you'll get this because I get it all the time. People are going to ask you, Jeff, what can I do to get 4 positions higher next year? Well, listen, I don't vote. I don't decide what's going to get there. So my best advice, be in the head of every decision maker in your business, have good ratings, deliver a compelling, interesting show, and be connected across all the platforms. If you do that, then you let the chips fall where they may.
One thing just to put a bow on that, that everybody I've talked to that has been in no matter what format, they have said to me, this means more to me because it's voted on by my peers. So to your point, that's really a strong thing. So you want to jump in and review the categories?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
I
there's
like,
a lot of them.
there's a lot of them. You can tell me what impressed you or maybe surprised you, and let's jump in with rock.
On the rock front, I thought, to me, the story of the rock format, if you look at the results, the story is WMMR in Philadelphia. Not only were they number one in the show category, which, if you follow the business, Preston and Steve are a juggernaut. Early in my career, it was 2006. I programmed in that building for a few months. And so I saw, what goes into their art. Keep in mind, that's 19 years ago. I'm pretty old. Uh, but MMR, Preston and Steve, yeah, Pierre Robert was in the top three. Yeah, Chuck D'Amico is the number one PD.
Mhm.
I think it really comes down to that. One thing you'll hear me say as we go through these categories, you can make a case for someone in 21st through 25th to be in the top 20. Maybe they were, 4 points away, and it's very tight, right? But when you get to the top of the top, usually it's hard to argue against some of these shows and these PDs that do well. And so, testament to Preston, Steve, Pierre, Chuck. They got a hell of a brand. Others obviously involved with the station, and that's a Beasley station, and Philadelphia is a key market for them. So they did pretty well.
Alternative.
So here's a fun story. Number one on the list on the shows was the Woody Show. Number two on the list was the Rizzuto Show. And if you follow this format, I was in St. Louis as a programmer building 101 ESPN. I used to listen, if I wasn't working on my station, to Woody and Rizzuto on the morning show on The Point, right? So when I saw it at first come out the way it did, I just started laughing because I'm like, of course, these two wind up connected. And there's going to
Right.
be some fun natural ball busting between them, I'm sure, right? And then on top of it, I've known Tommy Mattern, who runs The Point, for a while. And Tommy is an outstanding PD, and I would call him a friend. So this is the tough part when you're in my shoes and you're gathering all this feedback. Jeff, if I get the feedback and I know Tommy's station crushes, okay, it's constantly among the top in the market, double-digit share alternative station. But when I get the results, if Tommy was in 20th place, I would have to call Tommy and go, sorry, dude, I just added up, right?
Right.
He'd go, really? You put out a list, you know what my station does, and I'm in freaking 20th place. So there's almost like a sigh of relief sometimes when friends who do good work actually get recognized by their peers in the best way. Because I'm sitting there like, please, God, don't have this become something that I feel like I have to explain and make sense of. If he was in the top five, he'd probably be competitive and go, I should be one, just like I'm sure a lot of the PDs on the list would feel. But I thought it was a fair reflection. Mattern is excellent at what he does. You can have made that case for Lisa Warden, same thing on her end. But Woody and Rizzuto going 1-2, that was fun. I hope they've had some fun with a couple of texts breaking each other's chops.
So one of the hottest formats right now is classic rock. So let's jump into that one.
So I'll give you my take on it. I'm just curious, your own standpoint. Was there anything that surprised you on it?
Not really. No, it came about just the way I thought it would, really.
I think, if you look at, for example, the shows, right? Jim Kerr, I'm in New York. Guy's a legend, an icon of the radio business. Him and Bob and Tom in the top two slots. Hard to, you want to argue who should be 1 and 2, fine. But either way, I don't think you're going wrong with either of those. I thought it was great to see David Mahoney highly ranked up there. One talent who wound up on multiple lists and should feel pretty good was Big Rig with iHeartMedia. He
Right.
He placed top 6 in classic rock and was also on a few others. I know he was on the adult classic hits. Um, I think Steve Gorman in Minneapolis is one to keep your eye on in the future, who I think will move up the charts. He's a talented guy. And on top of it, Black Crowes drummer. And then I think you'll see potentially some change in the future because Lamont and Tonelli are no longer together on the Bone in San Francisco. So from that standpoint, that would be my takeaway on the shows. Keith Hastings did really well in the vote on the program director front. Him and Eric Wellman were very tight. Keith Cunningham did really well. He was one, and this was one that you and I talked about, and I still don't have the answer. Okay.
No, nor do I. And I know where you're going with this, and I don't either.
95.5 KLOS in Los Angeles. Keith Cunningham runs a great radio station, right? And I'm looking at all the information from their Wikipedia to every ratings outlet and how they're defined. And they're defined as a rock station. So I sit there and go, all right, but then should they be in the rock category or the classic rock category? And then we look at the playlist, and it's probably 80% classic rock to 20% rock. And I'm like, well, but if they're running Falling in Reverse and they're running Papa Roach, in addition to Guns N' Roses, in addition to The Who, we got to have them in both, right? So the thing that jumped out to me is Keith did really well in 2 categories. He was highly voted in the rock category and the classic rock category. Their shows, though, ranked high on rock and didn't appear as high on classic rock. Now, I don't know, I'm not in the mind of every voter. I don't know if that's because they're positioned publicly as a rock station, so you think of them in that light, because if you went by what they're playing, you could probably argue they're more of a classic rocker than they are a rocker, right? So there's some of that. I mean, we have the same thing in some, is it AC, hot AC, top 40? Like, you could argue. That's the one thing, Jeff, as I've gotten to know these formats, there's a lot of stuff, and don't let me vent for 2 seconds. One, define yourself. Who are you? What lane are you in? Number 2, if you're going to, I got this a couple of times, and I deal with it on the sports and news side too a little bit. Hey, by the way, I stopped working on that station 2 months ago. Oh, really? Did you update that on your LinkedIn bio? No. Did you update it on your Facebook? No. Did you update it on X? No. Is it on your station website? No. Am I supposed to be a private investigator who goes around chasing to find out if somebody left Salt Lake to go to Portland or Portland to go to San Diego or to Texas? Like, look, I got to go with the information we have. Even media-based, we would check to see who's listed as the contact here. And 90% of it, they're pretty accurate. But you're going to have some things that change. And then the last thing, and then I'll get off my soapbox. This is my favorite one. I send out the list to everybody. Please vote. If you if you see a mistake, let us know. You know what? We're doing 320 images. You're looking at a lot of stuff. I'm not going to say the name. I had to spend 1 hour on one individual to find one solo photo that I could put in an image. And I'm not telling you it's the best one, but some people are great about taking photos. And I'll even ask the voters, hey, if you have images of yourself or your shows, your brand logo, please send it in, right? And some don't. And then the photos come out. Oh, my God, I don't like the way I look.
Yeah, right.
If you actually had a photo somewhere in the universe, because I've dug through what people don't understand. My son probably, it's good that he went back to school right now, because he's going to need like 2 weeks of not talking to me. I've exhausted the hell out of him with this series. I'm like, go through the Facebook, Instagram, X station pages. If they're not there, see if there's a family member who's listed. See if there's a public image of they were at an event. And you don't understand how exhausting that can be. So, like, we want to make sure people look their best. We don't want to just, oh, here you are out on a lawnmower cutting the grass. But if you don't give us anything and that's all that's available, what am I supposed to do? I can't put just a big question mark and go, sorry, he doesn't exist. Or he doesn't exist, right? So anyway, those are my only gripes.
All right, well, let's move on to adult classic hits then.
Adult classic hits. I think, when you look at it, Broadway Bill Lee is just a legend. well regarded. At some point, like, I don't know if radio is going to continue creating those kind of talent. I hope so, because he's just a really unique personality. I mentioned before, Big Rig did well on Classic Rock. He also top four on the adult classic hits. Martha Quinn being in the top three, I thought was really cool. I remember her back on MTV. So to see her do well in the radio space was really, really awesome. MJ is a show I've known in Tampa for a while. Like Todd had done some work in the news talk space in the past. We've done a feature or two on him. One thing I loved, so Jody and Bender in Seattle, they got notified that they had made the list, and they did a spot on their show talking about it. And it wound up, although I don't like errors being pointed out because it means we screwed something up, I like when they happen for one reason. I could alert my son to go, see, they do pay attention to this stuff, right? So Jody and Bender caught that we had 105.7 the Jet, and it's supposed to be 95.7 the Jet. And we have the logo right, but one little thing, right? It happened on the CHR list. We had 7100 instead of Z100. And when you're looking at 320 images, adding boats, it is just hard, okay? And so no excuses. We got to be better. When we're perfect, I'll feel better. But to hear the vibe on the air, to see that it meant something to people, that's what makes this go, and that's what makes it fun. So I thought there were, good representation on the shows. Chris Ebbett did extremely well from K-Earth on the PD side. Tim Roberts is one who popped across multiple formats. So did Marty Link, Greg Swedberg as well. So obviously they're well regarded regardless of the format. I was glad to see Jules Riley in the top 10. Early in my programming career in St. Louis, she ran the Arch when I ran 101 ESPN. I think she's good at what she does. And so, look, you can make a case. Some people should be higher. Some people should be lower if you're in the company and you know what they do. But overall, I was pretty happy with it. Anything surprise you?
Well, I was really happy to see Lee McNabb in there. And in fact, there's a feature posted on the site about her. And I was glad to see that it wasn't all, the top 20 markets or so, that it reached down as far as Des Moines to recognize what she does. And she's really good at what she does.
Well, that's the key with involving people from different companies, because you're right. Like if you only go to the top 10, top 20 markets, you're not going to recognize somebody who's in a top 50 to top 100 market who's doing outstanding work. Even with those people involved, they don't know everybody in every market. And so it becomes a game of recall and just paying attention to the ratings and all the things that we've talked about earlier.
And just quickly before we move on, the other one that surprised me, and we talked about this offline, was Jack FM in Nashville. A perennial number two, number one in demo in Nashville didn't make the list.
Yeah, I was very surprised by that. And I think, the one thing I've noticed over the years, and I don't know if this will be the case in music or not, but a lot of times those smaller companies, independent owned outlets, think about this. If you had 100 people voting and you had 3 from a small group that only has 3 to 4 people voting, and then here are the top 5 major companies and they represent 50 votes. Before you know it, you're 3 up against 97, right?
Right.
It's harder to stand out. And so that goes back to why I try to stress the industry buzz side of this thing. You know your story better than anybody else does, right? But it doesn't mean anything if the only people who know are the people in your building. And I'm not saying, by the way, that that's their issue. Right. People voting, may just like 20 other stations. And so it's hard, but they certainly had an argument because their station does really, really well in Nashville. And when you're consistently in the top 2 doing 8 to 12 shares, I mean, probably in this.
All right, let's speaking of Nashville, let's move over to country.
So I'll say this, like when the series started, right? Rock, alternative, classic rock did pretty well. But when we hit country, the attention just went to a different level. Now, some of that rock launches, it's day one. People don't know what the series is yet. They're not seeing all the social sharing yet. So it builds, and that's the same with sports and news. By the time we got to country, it was massive. And congratulations to Marcy Braun to be recognized as the top program director. I thought was really awesome. She works in a great building, Odyssey, Chicago. Got a lot of friends in that spot, and so testament to her work. She's got some really good talent on the air there as well. I thought if you looked at the top five, I mean, again, you could argue should five be four, four be five, three be two, two be three. But when you look at the names, Greg Swedberg, Mike Preston, Tim Roberts, Jeff Capucci, Brian Mitchell, like all of these guys are highly regarded. Mark Raz, Mike Moore, Gator Harrison and Travis Daly in Nashville. And so I think you got a really strong cast of programmers in this format. On the music, on the radio side of it, to me, this was the biggest, I don't want to say beating, but it was pretty strong. Bobby Bones is here and everyone else is here. And it doesn't mean that
Right.
the same quality show. It just means he's got such massive reach and he does so well across so many markets that everybody in the business says, tip your cap, that's the guy. And so
Yeah.
he had a 144-point win in the category, which was incredible. There was some other, there were a lot of shows with some syndication, which I thought was cool because it's easy to get, to go for the local, which I, personally love. I love local content. But when it's being done at a high level, like a Bobby Bones, like a Wayne and Tay, like a B-Dub Radio, and some of the others who were nationally promoted, I mean, we had like 4 or 5 in the top 10 that were in that space. And so
Right.
just a really strong category, which when I said earlier, when you look at the voting, right, and you see that, hey, you're in the top 25, and you find out, hey, there's actually, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, Jeff, how many shows were actually in this, because like down below, you'll see it says of the 109 shows to receive votes, right? And bear with me for a second, because I just want to pull this up so I could give the viewers a little bit of backstory on this. So I'm looking at country radio shows and the total amount of votes that came in, the total amount of shows that were eligible for this list. Jeff, it was 150 plus. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a massive category. You're in the top 5, top 20 on this. That's pretty significant.
That's a big deal. Yeah. How about urban hip hop?
I mean, it's Charlemagne the God's world, and we're all just living in it, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Thea Mitchum, highly ranked, no surprise. They're well regarded in that format. I was really happy with the amount of participation we had on the urban side because, look, it's not a space that I've spent a lot of time in. I'm a new face to a lot of people. And I had a lot of really established, top-notch people take part in the voting on that. So I want to publicly thank them. Charlemagne was here. The rest were lower. You got some really powerful talent between Ebro in the Morning, the Steve Harvey Show, DL Hughley. I think you can make a case Ricky Smiley could be higher. I think there are some others, like the one thing that jumped out, and you tell me if you noticed anything different. And this is the hard part, because when you look at the program directors, Jeff, and I'll give you a great example of this. I go down the PD list, and the top 2 are from New York. Then you have Boston. Then you have LA in the next 2 slots. Then San Francisco, Houston, St. Louis, Kansas City, Austin, and Detroit. A lot of range there, right? Now let's look at the shows. And you have National, New York, National, New York, National, Atlanta, National, Atlanta, National, right? You go through the rest, the top 20 from 11 to 20, New York, National, New York, National. And so there is a lot of New York, National, LA, which if you're in a market that's in Philadelphia, if you're in Boston, if you're in some of these other cities and you're kicking ass, cutting through against some of these really,
Yeah.
really hard. And so it doesn't, again, there's some really good shows. Reach Media, which the division of Urban One, has some powerful shows that really do well. You could argue the Morning Hustle should be higher than 20th. Smiley should be up from 10. I'll tell you, there's one guy in Houston who I can make an argument should be on this list, and that's Mad Hatta, who is outstanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No.
and so, that being said, I thought we had the right people voting. And so as long as you get the people voting, if they know more than we do, God bless them.
Let's move on to AC, hot AC.
So were you surprised at all? Like, and this is the one thing that I try to say when we put out the post. I'm aware that Chris Conley is not running the day-to-day
Right,
of life
right,
in KTU, and Jill Kempton's now in New York. Uh,
right.
but this is based on 2024. And the way I've tried to explain this in simple terms, if we were picking the MVP of the NFL for last season, we're not, and it was coming out in March, we're not thinking about what roster the player went to now. We're looking at last season's
Right.
performance. So for Chris Conley to go out on top, kudos to him. That was a tight race, him and Jim Ryan, which again, the New York Power, well regarded. LA had, spots 4 and 5 with John Peake and Jill Kempton. I'm sure John loves that Jill moved to New York, so now he could gobble votes as well, right? I'll tell you this: there was one surprise to me on this list. I do, before I get to that, I want to point out I thought it was great that Ellen K and to see Cubby and Christine, Carson and Kennedy, some shows led with women in the format doing really well. Delilah, obviously, really popular in the hot AC format. I think Ellen K is outstanding at what she does. The one surprise I was going to touch on, I was in San Francisco for 4 years. I know Brian Figula is a really good PD, and especially in this format. He was top 6 with Coit, but I didn't see anybody from Coit make the top 20. And to me, again, just one man's opinion, when you're constantly at the top in a top 5 market, not just in ratings, but in revenue, because they crush in that market. That's where I look and I go, is there maybe a little too much of a Northeast national kind of bias? Because they're on the West Coast. I know that brand is really formidable. And so that was the only one that surprised me. I think, there were a lot, like, I was really happy to see the KVJ show in West Palm get credit, because I've been in rooms before with Kevin Rolston, who I think is excellent. And so to see those guys, when you're in a market the size of West Palm and you're outperforming shows that are in New York, LA, some of the top, that obviously means Hubbard's got a really strong program there. So that was great. Anything on your end that jumped out that
Yeah, I
surprised?
was really, really very pleased to see Tom Cook make the list from Baltimore.
Yeah,
Tom is a good PD who's been around for a long time. He hasn't always been, the flashy guy or anything, but he knows his stuff and he's really good. And I was really glad to see him get recognized.
I love those kind of stories when you get a Baltimore into the mix, like the West Palm I just mentioned. That being said, like, you also have to be fair to the people who are in the majors. Like if you're, in that format and you're in New York and you're crushing it in ratings and revenue, that matters just the same as being successful in San Antonio, And so a lot of that category, Jeff, was the hardest. AC, hot AC, and we combine it because look, I could do these individually, but we'll be doing series for 40 days because there's so much
Right.
definition. But there were over 215 shows in the AC hot AC category. If you're number one like Carson and Kennedy, you got to be over the moon. I mean, that's you can make a case for a lot of people. There were over 100 shows that got votes, and so anybody cracking that top 20 in that category should feel good.
And lastly, but not least, CHR Top 40.
Um, I'm been a Elvis Duran follower for a long time, well aware of his impact. He did really well, really, really well in the vote. And so similar to the Bobby Bones side of things, he just had a comfortable lead. The I think the biggest surprise, and not, if you pay attention to talent and who does well, you could certainly argue Mojo and Seacrest, right? They're really talented. But when you think of the bigness, I think back to like Elvis's conversation on CBS where he talked about the bigness of like him and Seacrest, right? And then Mojo outperforms Seacrest in the vote. I went, oh my God,
Right.
I didn't see that one coming. So
No.
I was happy. I'm sure Ryan's probably going to come back, look at the list and go, that's wrong. We got to be up to number 2 at least, right? And if you're in Mojo in Detroit, you're going, hey, some people in the business really like what we're doing. So those were cool. I liked seeing, like some of the others that pop on the list, the Burt Show, Chet Buchanan, the Jubal Show in Seattle. That guy's really talented. I remember being out in Seattle for a project years ago in sports talk and thinking, all right, that guy could probably convert and do really well in any format. And so there's some really talented people on the PD side. I think, Z100, the power of that brand. And Mark Adams just got there in the beginning of 2024. Obviously, the station is doing incredibly well. And so no surprise there. Beata Murphy in LA, similar to Seacrest, being at 3, she's probably going to call Dylan Sprague today and say, you shouldn't be in 2. That's my spot, right? So have some fun with it. But all of them, I think the one takeaway I would say on the PD side, CHR is an iHeart format. They own this spot. If you look at the top 10, Jeff, number 1, Z100, Mark Adams. Number 2, Dylan Sprague, Kiss 108. Beata Murphy, Kiss 102.7, Kiss FM in LA, all iHeart. Maynard in Seattle, iHeart. Tony Travato in Detroit, iHeart. Rich Davis, who, by the way, Rich, the challenge for next year, I need you to at least get a 7th or 8th radio station, a program, so we could
We get
really.
that across the list there. Yeah.
Rich has to be like the most proud guy in radio. Like, nobody is programming 6 stations like Rich Davis, and he could definitely call on that. Believe me, my son doing the image, not really a fan for this. All this in there, and so that was fun. But again, iHeart, Dan Hunt, San Francisco, iHeart, James Howard, Chicago, iHeart. Jim Archer broke it up in San Francisco, and then you have Mark Medina in Phoenix, iHeart. So they crushed the CHR format. Any things on your end on that?
Yeah, just much like the Tom Cook thing, I was glad to see Brian Kelly from Odyssey in Milwaukee get in there because Brian's been there, geez, probably 30 years, if not at least 25. And he's just steady Eddie and just does his thing and does it well. And I was glad to see that he got in there.
Yeah, and there was some like you go back to the rock alternative category. We had some representation from FM 102 in Milwaukee, smaller station, getting some love. I love seeing that. I think that's a testament to our voters. Some people who, yeah, they may know their own company and they may know some of the major players better than some others, but people don't get on this list with one vote, Jeff. Like,
Right.
I'll get these votes turned in. It's like, I know I'm in market 72, and I'm just making this up off the top of my head. I'm in market 72, and I'm not in the top 5 in ratings, but I'm the number 1 show in America, right? Okay. You better hope for other people to see the same thing for you to be on the list. And then you wind up with 1 vote, And so you're not getting in here without solid representation from a lot of people. And so to those who did make it, congratulations, well earned.
So I feel like I'm not even giving you a chance or your son to come up for air here, having just put the bow on this. But is it coming back for next year?
Yeah, it'll come back for next year. I mean, look, when we set out to do music and launched the brand in July, I knew I wanted to do this. I thought it was important for the industry. What I said earlier, show off the industry. My one piece of advice, I don't think enough people do this. While it's cool to share it on social and, celebrate your success with your friends, push this to your sales manager. Tell your salesperson, get this out in front of clients. Why? it's an industry trade. It doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things compared to what an advertiser agency or, media buyer is going to look at. However, people like to be in business with successful brands and talent. And so anything you do, whether it's with us or another trade or a newspaper writes about you, TV shows, tell your story. The more you tell your story, the more people go, we need to get on board with these guys. And so, it's cool. Hopefully it's hanging in a few studios. Hopefully it's made some people feel good about what they're doing, that it gets noticed. And if anything, I think next year we'll make it even better. There's some people, if you didn't vote this year, I'm coming to you next year. So, I want more participation. I know there's probably some people who didn't vote who said, I'm not going to give my votes. And now they're going, man, maybe I should have gotten involved in this. And so that's cool. We'll get to 200, 225 next year, and we'll just make it bigger and better.
Advice on how to get on that list if you're not on it, or if you're, as I used to say, bubbling under the top 20.
A lot of friends in the programming world, consultant world, executive world have good ratings, do an original, cool sounding show that produces revenue and connect across multiple platforms. And again, back to the last thing, industry buzz. People need to, we talked about the mixed story in Nashville earlier, right? The Midwest story, right? On the adult classic hits. That's a station that should be on that list, right? So if I'm in that building today and I didn't, okay, how are we going to make sure the industry knows this next year in a greater light? So we're on that list, and our peers give us the respect that we have fought so hard to earn.
I'm going to guess some of this will land on GMs or an agent's pockets to come negotiation time too. But so this has been fun.
Your paycheck. I don't think Bob Pittman's going to go, well, since we had 9 of the top 10 PDs in this list, let's give them all 10% raises.
Yeah, no, I don't.
But it doesn't hurt your standing, when you go in and go, look, people in the business would probably hire me because I'm pretty good at what I do.
Pretty good, yeah. So this is fun. Wrap it up with some final thoughts, if you would.
Just a thank you. Thank you to everybody who took the time to look at the articles, share the posts and the images, who might not have known what we do and now do because a list brought them in the door. I think one thing that, I'm known in the sports and news side of the business. People have been around me enough that they know what we do. On the music side, we're brand new. We just went into this in July. And the thing that I would just ask is come back, check it out. We're doing some good content, and we're doing this because I love the radio business. I want to highlight the radio business, but I don't want to just, although the lists are great and I love the lists, I don't want to do that 52 weeks a year. I want to get into the how and the why behind why people have success, how stations are popping on social that others can learn from. So we want to make sure that we're telling the stories of program directors, brands that have unique story, a cool promotion that you might have come up with that produced great results that you might think lives in your world and is important only in your building. Guess what? It's not. Jeff cares. I care. And so the more we can tell stories, the better I think the content will be. And that only works with people, taking the time to read what we do, share what we do. And so to everyone who voted, thanks for the trust. Thanks for being part of the process. And next year, let's make it even better.
Sounds good. Thank you, JB.
You got it, Jeff. We'll talk soon.